The Royal Bank of Canada is facing a major backlash for outsourcing IT jobs to foreign workers, putting the government's temporary foreign worker program in the spotlight. But the Royal is not the first Canadian company to use this program, and odds are it won't be the last. Joining us now with more in the nation's capital, Sean Silcoff. He is commentator for the Report on Business Insight at the Globe and Mail. And Sean, we're glad you could spare some time for us today. I know this has been a huge story. Your paper's covered it a lot. Everybody's covered it a lot. But on the chance that some of our viewers aren't completely up to scratch on the latest, why don't you just give us the background and fill us in as to how this came to the public's attention?
Sure. Well, Steve, this is quite an incredible story. It broke last weekend. CBC had a piece about Royal Bank of Canada and their plans to outsource 45 jobs in their information technology part of their business. Not a lot of jobs. Outsourcing has been happening for years at all the banks, not just Royal Bank, in fact, all over Canadian business. And in fact, Royal Bank has been working with the same outsourcing supplier since about 2005. What's different, though, I think, with this story is they spoke to someone, came out and explained how the process was working, how foreign workers from the company were in Canada, and he and his colleagues who were about to lose their jobs had to train these people how to take their jobs away from them. And there was something about this story that just struck a nerve, and social media, Facebook and Twitter in particular, just absolutely exploded on the weekend, and it's been the case ever since.
And how did the Royal respond to all this?
Well, they responded a bit clumsily at first. They spoke like human resources people. They said, well, we've done nothing wrong. We will attempt to find jobs for these people. And if there's any problems with the use of the temporary foreign worker program, well, that's the problem with the supplier that we use. It just fed fuel to the fire. One thing that's interesting that's happened recently is that companies globally can no longer blame their suppliers for problems that happen in their supply chain. We saw this with Walmart, actually. There was a fire at a Bangladesh factory last fall, and Walmart now has a policy in place that all of its suppliers have to guarantee that even their subcontractors, their facilities are all completely up to scratch or they get cut off. This is the new trend in the corporate world, and I think Royal Bank, by just blaming the supplier at first, sort of fell afoul of that, and social media just smelled that instantly and called them out for it.
And the 45 employees at the heart of this whole story, have they in fact lost their jobs?
Well, Royal Bank changed their story as the week went on. Yesterday, Gord, Nixon, the CEO, first of all, he went out and sent a fairly dull message, an HR type message out to employees at first, saying, I have the wording here, we will work diligently to find suitable roles for the remaining staff. Yesterday, he apologized for the way the bank had handled this, for the sensitivity. And now he's saying we should have been more sensitive and helpful to these employees. All will be offered comparable job opportunities within the bank. So it's a good news story for those employees, but it's really just the tip of the iceberg of a much larger story.
We are going to talk about that tip of the iceberg in a second, but from the company's point of view, this is 45 employees in a company that hires more than 50,000 Canadians. Are they entitled to feel a little gobsmacked by the reaction to all this?
I think so. I mean, as I said, just every bank has done outsourcing. Every bank uses the temporary foreign worker program. In fact, all kinds of employers do. We had a story today that pointed out that 33,000 companies have used the temporary foreign worker program in the last in a 2-year period,
including the CBC, which broke the story.
Absolutely, the CBC, the Globe and Mail, Bank of Canada, the Girl Guides, even the Government of Canada itself. So this is a widespread practice. I think in this case, it's sort of a confluence of things. We have a very uncertain economy right now. Canadians are tapped out. We know that. Flaherty's been telling us we shouldn't be borrowing as much. And the banks are minting ever larger profits. Royal Bank reported a $7.5 billion profit last year. And I think the specter of of Canadian employees at such a profitable company not just being shown the door, but having to train their replacements on the way out. It's sort of, I think it has awoken the classic bank bashing tendency of Canadians. We haven't seen much of that come out, and I think it's just sort of shaken the silt from the bottom of the river, basically.
Well, as you pointed out, social media did go bananas about this story, and Facebook posted thousands and thousands of responses. I want to read just a few of them to you right now and then come out of it with a question. Here's one from somebody named Eric who said, "Save your corporate doublespeak and weak excuses for your next shareholders meeting. I'll be closing my accounts in the next few days along with thousands of your other customers. You'll have some explaining to do." Another one from Pete, "All Canadians should show the banks that we will not tolerate this kind of cost savings. How many more billions do they want to make at the expense of Canadian jobs? Close your accounts. I am." Let me give you one more, Sean. This one from an Arlen. "You should be ashamed of yourselves. My wife and I will be taking our business to TD ASAP." Now, this kind of indignation, I have no doubts that it's very sincere. But to the people who do you think that the people who put these messages on Facebook realize that probably the other banks that they want to take their money to punish RBC are doing the same thing as well?
Well, or do I think that they'll actually go ahead and do it? You know, it's funny. I looked at the stock price of RBC yesterday. I was curious to see if this had had any measurable impact on its stock price. Do you know of the 5 Canadian banks, Royal Bank stock is the one that went up the most this week. And this is from last Friday, believe it or not, from before this whole story broke. And the fact is we have a choice between 5, arguably 6, 7 financial institutions in the country. We have an oligopoly. I think Canadians generally feel like they get about the same service level from any financial institution here. They probably have a sense that they all employ similar practices. And you know, it's a real bother to go change your bank account, your mortgage, your online trading account. So I think from vitriol to actual practice, I think we're going to lose an awful lot of the complainers along the way.
Well, whatever the cost of laying off these 45 people might have been, I think the RBC probably spent that much in full-page ads in your newspaper and probably most of the major newspapers in the country today with what was quite an abject apology. We've also seen that Prime Minister Harper has come out and weighed in on this issue now, saying maybe we've got to take a look at this temporary foreign worker program and see if it's doing what it was intended to do. Where do you think all this goes as a result of the Prime Minister's comments and the public relations nightmare that this has turned into?
Well, it is a PR nightmare, and I have to feel sorry for Royal Bank. They spent about $95 million supporting good causes last year, I mean, and you have to think a lot of that publicity was now money that maybe could have been spent not outsourcing as much. But this is all really a side issue. I think really the focus has to be on this temporary foreign workers program. This is a program that has traditionally been used as a stopgap measure. It's supposed to be flexible when there's a real shortage of skilled workers. The government is supposed to be able to bring in more to help employers. But it's really exploded in the last 12 years. Under the Liberals, it went up about 50%, from 100,000 temporary foreign workers in Canada a year to 150, and it's more than doubled since 2006 when the Tories came in. They were responding largely to employers in Western Canada who have had a hard time filling jobs. It's hard to compete with the oil patch. And so they've really committed to try to make it easier for employers to bring in foreign workers. They brought in an accelerated process last year. You see, to bring in a foreign worker, you have to often have to get something called a labour market opinion. It's a document from Human Resources Canada. Well, the government last year said, you know what, we're going to make it easier. It's not going to take you 12 weeks to get this processed. We'll do it in 10 days. You can pay the foreign workers 15% less than you have in the past. You don't have to show the same documentation to prove that you tried to hire a Canadian first before going to this program. They required a whole lot less in terms of other paperwork and commitments from the employers, what they had to do to protect the employees. And by the way, we'll only look at 1 out of 5 of these. Well, you can guess what happened in 1 year. Alberta Federation of Labour this week released a document showing that it's been a free-for-all for this program. And it's supposed to accelerate the program to help bring in high-skilled workers. Well, you've got something like 33 A&Ws on the list. You've got convenience stores, you've got gas stations. And suddenly we look at this change in a whole new light, and you say, well, is this actually being done to alleviate a temporary problem, or is this becoming an alternative stream for employers to hire non-Canadians at lower wages and sort of fuel this migrant worker population in Canada like we've seen happen in Europe? And this brings up some troubling talking points, like are we going to create social problems if the migrant workers, once they come here, decide that they don't want to go home? I mean, this has been a problem it's been a rampant problem in Europe, for example.
Well, let me put another potential spin on this. Yes, the notion that perhaps employers have been using this program in order to pay employees less. I don't know, is it also potentially an option here that Canadians don't want to do these jobs, and therefore getting foreign workers to do them was the only way to fill these jobs and make that happen?
Very possibly, but under this pilot program, for example, employers don't even have to prove. You see, under the old system, employers have to really go to great lengths to show that they really tried to hire Canadian workers first. They have to provide documentation. They really have to go out of their way to advertise that they posted these jobs, and a lot of that has really been taken away under this pilot program. So I think a lot of employers are just acting rationally and based on what's before them. You have a lower chance of getting caught. You don't have to show definitively necessarily that you've gone this great length to hire Canadians. So why even bother going through the process in the first place? And so it's, rather than becoming a stopgap measure, it's becoming a preferred tool to hire temporary foreign workers. That appears to be what is happening. And Stephen Harper certainly has heard that. I mean, his comments in Calgary on Thursday suggest that he's heard from Canadians, but he also understands what the implications are of this program that appears to be growing a bit out of control.
Well, when stories like this happen, obviously there is that initial orgy of response, which is, my goodness, this is horrendous. How can the bank do this? This is an appalling abuse of the program, et cetera, et cetera. But then usually what happens after that initial response is a second response from the other side of the argument, which is, it is the bank's responsibility to make as much money as it possibly can, not just for its shareholders, but also for the people who hold, there's people who hold Royal Bank stocks in their pension plans and, are depending on this income in their retirement, and they want the bank to make as much money as possible as well. Does that side of the argument hold up as far as you're concerned?
I think outsourcing is a way of life, and most Canadians realize that. I think there's a sense that if it's done, people want to know that it's, I guess, being done right, or being done in a way that's not insensitive to the workers, insensitive to Canadians. I think the outsourcing argument will largely die down. And don't forget also that this whole situation that was fanned by the government, by government ministers coming out early on and saying, well, if there's a problem here, we're going to investigate it. So they sort of, they gave an air or they sort of legitimized the concern that something wrong was happening here. And that may not necessarily be the case. Royal Bank certainly has been very consistent in saying it broke no rules. Now, whether its outsourcing agent did, I guess we'll find that out, but that doesn't seem to be the case so far.
Okay, so Sean, in our last minute and change here, obviously this program, if anything, this foofara has demonstrated that this program has been open to abuse. The Prime Minister's weighed in. Do you see the political levers in Ottawa tightening this thing up right now to stop a lot of what was happening in the past?
I think so. I think Harper sent a pretty clear message about that. They also promised, the government did promise to revisit the program in its budget last month. So there's definitely something in the works in Ottawa, but I think this probably moves the issue up to the front burner a bit for the government. And
can you see it actually going back to what it was supposed to be in the first place, which is, if Canadians really can't do the job and the company has looked hard for a Canadian but can't find one to do the job, yes, then we'll bring someone in from offshore? Is it going to go back to that?
I think we'll see more checks and balances. I think the government will want to stay committed to keeping the process a little bit more streamlined, and there are certainly legitimate reasons for that. But I think It'll have to pass the smell test for Canadians. I think when you look at the application form and the results, people will have to satisfactorily answer the question: did employers go through the right hoops here? Is the spirit and the letter of the law being respected? I have no doubt that we'll continue to see a lot of temporary foreign workers coming into Canada. We have a skills shortage out west that's been well known for a long time. Obviously, the balance needs to be reset, and I'm sure the government will make attempts to do that.
Gotcha. Sean Silcoff, commentator for the Report on Business Insight in the Globe and Mail. Thanks a lot for joining us on TVO tonight.
Thanks, Steve.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.